The Aldergate reception hall used to hold 16,000 people for concerts. Now it holds cots in rows, folding tables with laminated forms, and the particular gray light that comes through a stadium roof built for spotlights instead of sun. I've worked intake there for 6 years, since the first wave came down out of the collapsed corridor, and nobody in this hemisphere knew what to do with them except feed them and give them numbers. I'm 44, and 6 years of that work has worn most of the softness out of how I talk to strangers. I've got a scar along one knuckle from a supply crate that fell wrong my first month, and I don't smile at people until I've earned the right to. Her number was 4471C. Her name, according to the arrival manifest, was unconfirmed, non-cooperative, possible cognitive trauma. I read that line twice before I ever looked up at her. She was sitting very straight on the folding chair across from my table, hands folded, slate blue skin gone ashen at the knuckles from cold or hunger or both. Dark wine red hair pulled back the way you'd expect from someone who'd had to do it herself for a long time. Her eyes were pale gold, and they didn't move off me once, not even when I asked her the standard questions in the standard order. Place of origin? The Van Tressa Dominion. She said it the way you'd state a fact about gravity. I wrote it down. Nobody else at that table had, apparently. The notes above mine had crossed it out twice and written, delusional grandiosity, refer to psych wing instead. Occupation, prior to displacement? I did not have an occupation. A pause, not embarrassed, just precise. I was the Dominion's last queen. I've processed 11,000 people through that hall. I've heard every kind of claim a frightened person makes to hold on to who they were, before everything came apart. That they were a general, a scientist, somebody's beloved. Most of the time I write it down as self-reported, and I move on, because the kindest thing I can do is not argue with a person's last handhold. I wrote hers down as fact. That's not the format, said Director Voss, when he found the form later that week. He had a stack of them actually, every form I'd filed on her. Corrected. You don't editorialize the intake record, Cray. She meets 3 criteria for psychiatric hold. Get her processed to the West Wing before her file makes this whole hall look like it doesn't take triage seriously. She's not a danger to anyone. She told a translator the entire arena owed her fealty. She was answering a question about her title. That's not the same thing as a threat. He looked at me the way he'd looked at me twice before, in 6 years, when I'd pushed on something I shouldn't have. You've got a soft spot for the pretty ones who talk like queens, Cray. I didn't answer that. I went back to my table, and I kept writing her name the way she'd given it to me, in full, on every form that crossed my hands, even the ones nobody but me would ever read. It wasn't hard to do right by her, is the thing people misunderstand about dignity. It never took anything from me to write 4 extra words. It cost me nothing to bring her water before I brought her the clipboard, to ask if she'd slept before I asked her anything the system needed. She never once thanked me for it in words. She watched me do it, every day, the way you'd watch weather you weren't sure would hold. The other caseworkers had their own shorthand for her by then. Some called her the Countess, not unkindly, but not believing it either. A nickname you give someone you've already decided is playing a part. A few avoided her table altogether, uneasy with how still she sat, how little she asked for. I took her table on purpose, every morning, before anyone else could claim it as theirs to manage. I brought a second folding chair from the storage closet so she wouldn't have to sit across an intake desk like she was being interviewed for a crime. Small things. None of them cost the arena anything. None of them showed up on any form Voss would ever read. She noticed the chair before she noticed anything else that week. She didn't say why it mattered. She didn't have to. There were harder nights. A supply shortage left the West Wing without proper heat for 2 of them, and I found her at 4471C's cot wrapped in a blanket meant for someone half her size, jaw set, refusing to ask the night staff for another because she'd watched them turn away 3 other refugees for that same request that same hour. I brought her mine. She tried to refuse it too, out of the same stubborn insistence on taking no more than anyone else was given. I told her it wasn't charity, it was inventory, and eventually she let me settle it over her shoulders, without either of us calling it anything at all. You don't perform kindness either, she told me once, near the end of that second week. You don't want credit for it. I've watched for that in men before, the ones who help so they can be seen helping. You've never once looked around the room to see if anyone noticed you doing it. There wasn't anyone worth performing for, I said, only you. She didn't answer that. She didn't look away from it either. 3 weeks in, she asked me, why do you keep writing it the way I say it? Because you're the only one who was there, I told her. Everyone else in this building is guessing. She was quiet a long moment. The others assume I invented a kingdom because I couldn't survive the truth. That the truth is easier if I make myself someone. I don't assume that. Why not? Because you don't perform it. People who invent a throne for themselves usually want you to notice the throne. You've never once asked me to believe you. You've just kept saying the same thing. Every time. Exactly the same way. For 3 weeks, whether I write it down or not. Something moved behind her eyes then, small and careful, like she was deciding whether it was safe to let it show. The bloodline scanners came through Aldergate in the 4th week, standard verification equipment, meant to catch smugglers using false Dominion citizenship papers to jump the asylum queue. Voss wanted her flagged for the psych transfer before the scanner team even set up, so her file wouldn't complicate their afternoon. I filed the paperwork to have her seen by the scanner team first instead, under the citizenship verification code, rather than the psychiatric one. It took me 2 days of pushing forms up 2 supervisors to get it approved, and I never told her I was doing it, in case it came to nothing, and she had one more thing taken from her by people who'd already taken everything else. The scan took 4 minutes. The tech ran it twice because the first result flagged for manual review. The signature matched something in the archival registry so exactly that the system assumed corruption in the data rather than a living match. It wasn't corrupted. The registry entry was 11 decades old, filed under a line the archive had marked extinct after the Dominion's collapse. A direct, unbroken royal signature, the kind the system doesn't generate by accident and can't be faked with paper. Voss read the printout twice, the same way I'd read her intake line the first day. Then he looked at her the way everyone in that arena had refused to look at her for a month, not as case number 4471C, not as a diagnosis to move along the queue, but as a person whose name on a form had been true the entire time. "You'll need to be moved," he said, quieter than I'd ever heard him. "Diplomatic wing. There'll be representatives." "I'd like Desmond to walk me there," she said, before he'd finished. Voss looked at me. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything that needed saying. We walked the length of the arena floor together, past the cots and the folding tables and the gray stadium light, and people who hadn't looked twice at case 4471C in a month were on their feet as she passed, some of them bowing without being told to, the way you do when something you doubted turns out, all along, to have been exactly what it said it was. At the doors to the diplomatic wing, she stopped and turned to me. "You wrote my name before you knew what it was worth," she said. "That's not something I'll forget." "I didn't write it because of what it was worth," I said. "I wrote it because it was yours." She held my eyes a moment longer than protocol required, and something in her face, not tears, she was too composed for that, just a brightness at the rims of her eyes she didn't try to hide, told me she understood the difference, and that it mattered to her more than the scanner ever could. "Come with me," she said, not as my caseworker, as the one who believed the paperwork before it was proof. I went.